are there like changes that you see in the mass tort world, in the legal world, over time?
From the mass tort perspective, I think, 10 or 20 years ago, it was the elites at the top, right? It was the top firms, and everybody was really exclusive and didn't want anybody getting in, and they wanted to stay in leadership. And what I've been trying to do myself and some younger mass tort attorneys, the barrier to entry is very hard. These cases are very expensive. You have to carry them for 5 to 7 years. We're fighting the biggest companies, the best attorneys in the world. Right. We could lose. But what I've tried to do is break down that barrier.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Tom Bosworth, and this is the City of Brotherly Law. Welcome to Philly's Legal Pulse, where we chat with some of the city's and the country's best attorneys about what's really going on in our courts and our communities. Let's dive in and see what's brewing in the City of Brotherly Law.
Can you tell us who you are and where you came from and kind of what the deal is?
Yeah, my name's Joe Fantini. I'm an attorney over at Rosen Injury Lawyers. Our practice is 100% dedicated to mass tort, so pretty unique in that sense. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. I grew up in the suburbs in Montgomery County, lived down in Society Hill, but I've been working in mass torts pretty much exclusively for 15 years, so I have a real unique background. I'm one of the few attorneys in the whole country that clerked for a mass tort judge, worked for Big Pharma on the wrong side for a while, and then crossed over and started helping people. So I got my start in the legal community working for Judge New down at City Hall a couple blocks from here, clerking in the mass tort department, and that was my first exposure to mass torts. I never even heard of mass torts before I started working for him, which is common, right? Nobody knows what it is.
Yeah. I feel like people always ask about class actions, right? But I feel like nobody even knows what a mass tort is. So how would you just define a mass tort?
Right. So very common. All my friends who are lawyers, they don't know what a mass tort is. But how I explain it to the clients is the class action is me, you, everybody was getting charged $10 extra a month by AT&T on our phone bill. We didn't know about it. We didn't do anything about it. Some unknown person to us in Oklahoma files a class action lawsuit on behalf of himself and all other similarly situated individuals. 2 months later, we get a postcard in the mail. We get an email saying, hey, this happened to you. You were getting charged $10 extra. Do you want to get in on this class action? Check this box and you'll get a check for $100. So it's a group of people that were all harmed by getting charged extra $10 against the same defendant. A class action is different from a mass tort because we didn't really need to do anything. In a mass tort, it's again a large group of individuals, thousands, tens of thousands harmed by a similar product. We'll probably talk about Roundup or Depo-Provera, but everybody has their own situation. And so somebody might have needed 1 round of chemo or somebody just was on wait and watch. But what you have to do in a mass tort is you have to come forward. You have to assert a claim. You can't sit back. So usually,
you can sit back in a class action.
Right. In a class action, we don't do anything. We get contact because AT&T knows who they did it to, knows who was harmed. Roundup, they don't know if I used it or you used it. So that's why you have to come forward. And usually in these cases, we only see about 8 or 10% of the harmed people come forward. So that's why it's so important to do the marketing and do that educational-based marketing messaging.
So you grew up kind of in Philly. You've lived in the city, but you lived in Montgomery County. I just moved out of the city, but so I'm loving it, even though I do love it down here. What was your childhood? Was mom or dad a lawyer? What set you on this path?
Yeah, so no, neither of my parents graduated college. I was a plumber, actually. My dad's a plumber. My brother's a plumber. I graduated college and I was a plumber.
Nice.
And I was just going to be a plumber, and I thought I had it made, and it was great. And then I applied to Widener, Delaware at night, and I went there at night session.
While you were working as a plumber?
While I was working as a plumber full time. And then I got the opportunity with Judge New. So, I thought plumbers had it good, but it's a little bit cushier as lawyers sometimes.
That's awesome. Did that come up in your interview with the judge? Was he interested in that? I mean, he's a great judge. But
Judge New, definitely. Yeah, I know him personally. Yeah. So, that did come up, and that's a little bit of my story, but I never grew up thinking I was going to be a lawyer or knew a lot of lawyers.
So I don't know if you felt this way, but I came from, my dad was a police officer. My mom waited tables. And I remember the first day I showed up to law school, I looked around and I was like, I don't belong here. Like, I don't know if I was just hyper focused on everyone else that had the blueprint, but I felt like they were so connected, and their dad was a judge, and I'm like, oh man, I don't belong here. But it was only as I got older and went through the profession that I realized that, you know, my life experience is actually, like, I think one of my best assets of not having that upbringing. And no shade to anybody that did, but it wasn't until I actually embraced that about myself that I felt like it made me a better lawyer. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I do, certainly, because you have a connection with people on a regular level. And, you know, I think a lot of people who had a similar upbringing like us, blue collar, parents both worked, you know, the thought of us being lawyers never crossed
out of
my
the
mind.
question. Yeah.
That wasn't an option. But then I also think it makes us able to relate to our clients better. And then also it makes us hungrier, like entrepreneurs, like what you're doing. You know, you thought, you know, my dad, my mom worked so hard, I can go and do it. You've seen that. And that's what I think is happening a lot with a lot of younger lawyers like us.
The new age.
Yes, the new wave that we can get into as well.
Definitely. And I want to talk about that, but I was just thinking about how diverse your experience has been, going from, I mean, you're working as a plumber, you're going to night law school, then you get this job with Judge New, who's one of the most, you know, well-known and busiest judges, handling some of the biggest cases in the country over in City Hall. And then you go from there, I guess, to the defense side first?
Yeah, so, you know, everybody all of a sudden wanted to hire me now that I was clerking for Judge New. So I went over to Wilson Elser, which is a national, international law firm with a big presence here in Philadelphia. And I worked for Big Pharma for 2 or 3 years, and I just defended the mass tort cases. And, you know, over time, I saw it wasn't always about, you know, winning the cases on the merits. It was a business decision. There was a spreadsheet about how they were going to handle it, how much time we would be billing, you know, what their strategic efforts were to cut the cases down. And then I did that for about 3 years, and then I moved over to Anapol Weiss, which is a big personal injury mass tort firm here in the city, and I was on the plaintiff side finally.
So you went from like Darth Vader to Luke Skywalker.
Exactly. That's what it felt like, you know, being able to connect with people, help people. Over at Wilson, you know, I was talking to the adjuster. Here, you know, at Anapol, you're speaking to real people, forming those relationships and seeing how you can have an impact on their lives.
What do you think was, there must have been things you learned working for the pharma companies and for the judge that helped you when you got onto the side where you're representing people. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I thought I learned a lot, and it was great exposure seeing what was Judge New trying to do with the cases. And he would be so kind to even explain to us before the case management conferences or the arguments about what his strategy was going in and what he expected. But really a job for a mass tort judge is to get the cases resolved. Whether it ends up in a plaintiff verdict or a defense verdict or a settlement, he's moving the cases towards resolution. So everything he's doing is geared that way. And of course, he's fair to the plaintiffs and the defense, but having the understanding that he appreciated how much work and effort and time was involved in these cases, and, you know, having the end game in mind. So that's what I understood about a judge, was he wanted the cases to resolve. He didn't care how they resolved. He wanted to do that. And on the defense side, what the strategy I felt like was, you know, make the other side work as much as possible. If it's deficiency letters, if it's following up on missing records, if it was, you know, just cutting down the inventory and limiting how many plaintiffs there were. It wasn't always, of course we'd go forward with experts, but it wasn't always to win on the merits. It was more limit the total exposure. And so seeing that from a defense side on how they handled the fact sheets, how they handled the pleadings, what information they really need, that allowed me then to represent my clients best and in the most efficient way possible. There's no need in mass torts to play games or hide discovery. It's just give them everything up front, and that's the best approach for any plaintiff attorney. but certainly in mass tort. So we can give it to them. We give them everything they need exactly as they want it, and that makes it easier for us and the clients.
Yeah, my first job as a lawyer was I kind of cut my teeth in the courtroom helping out in the background on some of these mass tort cases that went to trial. And I remember the first one I went to, I'm like going to the courtroom, it's like David v. Goliath, because you have like an army of lawyers for the pharma company in the back, and just the sheer volume and amount of paper and work being done is, unless you've been in the trenches like I know you have. I mean, you run the department at your firm, but people don't understand what goes into everything, I think, behind the scenes.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah, we were, local counsel for a pharma company, and they had, general counsel, and they had outside counsel, and it's exactly like you're saying. There'd be 10, 15 attorneys showing up just for one defendant, and there was 3 defendants. There's 40 lawyers on the side, and they're all coming in with banker boxes and want their say, and it's huge amount of work that goes on both sides. And that's what was great about Judge New, is he let everybody have their say, but it's like, we're pushing the cases forward, we're going to the next step.
Right.
This is what needs to happen for everybody. For the defendants, they want finality. The plaintiffs, they want the cases resolved too. So learning that definitely helped. But these mass torts are huge. You understand because you've been involved with them. But we're talking millions of documents, tens of thousands of patients. There could be, hundreds of depositions all over the world, documents getting translated, going back. Depo-Provera is a new one we're working on right now. There's 50 years of history of that.
What is that? What's
Depo-Provera? So Depo-Provera is the new hot mass tort, and it just came out at the end of 2024 that there were studies that showed women who use Depo-Provera have a very high increased likelihood of developing a brain tumor.
Oh, it's birth control, right?
It's a birth control that's an injection. So it's been on the market for almost 50 years now.
Oh my gosh.
So it's obviously very serious injuries, and we just got wind of this study back in November, filed a motion to form an MDL, which is a multi-district litigation, how the mass torts proceed. And in the beginning of the month, it got sent down to Judge Rogers in Florida, who oversaw the 3M earplug litigation.
Okay.
And she just had the first case management conference, and she's ready to go push these cases forward.
Good. That's crazy. See, that stuff blows my mind, where you see these studies come out like in the last year or two. And I have some of the hair relaxer cases where there's cancer caused by some of the ingredients in these chemical hair relaxers. But what do you see the defense do when these big studies come out that, finally prove, or I don't know, finally, they prove that there's some clear problem being caused by these products that have been around for so long, right? What's their playbook there? I mean, they can't fight the science. I mean, we know they do, but they often try to pay for it and do all sorts. But do you see patterns with how they approach these things?
Sure. It's always blame everybody except the product. So it's blame the doctors, blame the patients, and then it's junk science. I always think back to this one case I had where there was a study, and the author's name was Fu. His last name was Fu. And the tactic from the manufacturer was Kung Fu. And they brought out talking points of how to chop down and attack the study.
Was this in writing?
Yeah. Oh. And so that's, the type of document we discover in a lawsuit where they knew about this study, and instead of addressing it and making the product safer, they attacked the author, they attacked the science, and they attacked the patients that were in it.
It's crazy. Yeah, I have cases like in my hometown in Massachusetts right now. You might find this interesting, against GE and Monsanto about PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls.
Right.
And it's like one of the biggest Superfund sites in the country up there. They dumped like millions of pounds of PCBs in the river. They actually dumped them in in an elementary school and used that soil to build a playground. So you have all these cancer clusters with all these kids, and I know this doesn't surprise you, but I feel like people watching, I'm getting documents, internal memos from 50 years ago, where the company executives, the people are talking about, oh my God, there's one that said like our neglect will bite our grandchildren or something, like where you're like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, why would you write that down?
Yeah.
Like,
No,
but it is quite literally evidence of their own consciousness of their guilt. But it always shocks me that even when it all comes to light, they still try to fight it somehow, even it's right there on the paper.
And that's kind of the PFAS cases that everybody's talking about now. 3M, right? They hired a special scientist to look into it. And 50 years back, they did a study and said it was all contaminated.
Oh, really?
And it's all from our products. It's all our waste. And then the second scientist came in and found the same thing. And then the leadership of 3M was just like, we'll just have to deal with it when we deal with it. And it's these companies, right? They always are just profit over patience.
For sure.
That's what they see. Their loyalties to their shareholders, and it's people like us that are going in willing to fight these behemoths that have the whole army of attorneys, unlimited budget, billion-dollar products, fight tooth and nail against this small town person who's hurt.
Yeah.
Whole life is ruined.
Right.
And that's what is a good feeling about now being on this side, being the person who can fight for them.
For sure. And I feel like most people know or have an inkling that big, massive companies are up to no good. But when you're in our seat and you're actually going through the evidence and seeing it, I mean, I don't know about you, but I talk to my family about stuff too. And I think people are still shocked that companies actually, like to your point, will commission a study. They'll look in the right places and they'll ask the right questions, but then they get the answer that they don't like and they just bury it. Right. For years, I think people still have a hard time actually believing that happens, which is, in my humble opinion, why I think you see a lot of these huge verdicts, these huge results, especially in our city here.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And those verdicts are needed to punish the companies because there's nothing else we've seen through their conduct that will make them change. They have the study. They ask the questions. They know it's bad. They don't do anything about it. It's only when we sue them, Roundup, it's been on the market for decades. Finally, in the last 2 or 3 years, they changed the makeup of it that they're selling at Home Depot. Did anybody besides me and you know that? Of course not. They didn't say anything about it. They didn't announce it at all. Well, they would have never done it if it wasn't for these lawsuits.
My favorite thing about that, glyphosate, I think, was the bad ingredient that then they took out. But then and I don't know if this has played itself out in the courtroom, but I have a couple of those coming up for trial. And I've always asked myself, like, they must go in there and defend glyphosate, right? But then you say to yourself, like, yeah, but you guys took that out of it. Right. So, there's more misdirection and games.
Oh, they didn't take it out of it because it's unsafe. It's another reason. Now they have something that's better and even safer. So it's exactly like you're saying. To a regular person, there's no other explanation why this product, this glyphosate you had in there for 50 years, it was the #1 seller, the best in the world, you suddenly take it out, and your explanation is, we just found something new that also happened to be around for 50 years.
The new ingredient is not a new...
No, it's not new. It didn't just get developed 2 years ago. It's been around.
Unreal. Switching gears, because you've been in this field, what are there like changes that you see in the mass tort world, in the legal world, over time? Have you seen any sort of shifts or changes into how these cases are being handled or the way that lawyers are approaching them?
Sure. So from the mass tort perspective, I think, 10 or 20 years ago, it was the elites at the top, right? It was the top firms and everybody was really exclusive and didn't want anybody getting in, and they wanted to stay in leadership. And what I've been trying to do myself and some younger mass tort attorneys, the barrier to entry is very hard. These cases are very expensive. You have to carry them for 5 to 7 years. We're fighting the biggest companies, the best attorneys in the world. Right. We could lose. But what I've tried to do is break down that barrier. And so somebody who might have 1 case or 2 cases, just educate them so that the clients, the injured person, learns about it and knows, hey, I could help this person that I represent in this PI case, and let them kind of get in on it, because there's enough cases out there. And at the end of the day, we're really helping people. So I've seen a little bit of this changing of the guard, I'll call it, with some of the mass tort firms that were there. They're still there. They're still present. But I think the next generation of younger lawyers are coming in to make a name for themselves.
So you just hit on something that's just gets stuck in my craw all the time. And it goes back to like growing up in a working class family and having the privilege to become an attorney and live, a life that, my parents worked their so hard to provide for us and did such a good job. And now because of that, I'm able to live an even more comfortable life. And so one of the things that always bugged me or confused me is like, to your point, this concept of, hey, I'm just going to help out another lawyer or another law firm because I'm Joe and I handle these cases. I'm the managing partner, but this other firm, we're all in it together, right? Like there's enough food to go around. My hope, and I think you're speaking to this, is that this younger generation is going to be more inclusive, going to be more collaborative, and recognize that this is it's a communal effort toward making the world a safer place, literally. And we're all going to be okay. We're lawyers. We're all going to have enough to eat, and you don't need to be greedy. You don't need to be.
Yep.
But I feel like that's a minority viewpoint as in the legal field, and I hope we're changing.
Right. No. So instead of that scarcity mindset that you're saying that there's a limited number of cases, or if Tom goes out and signs up that big case. It's not going to be a case for me. But what you need to think is change the thinking. And it's, wow, if Tom goes out and gets that good verdict, if he changes the law, if he makes a difference in his client's case, imagine how many clients we could all help. And there's plenty of cases to go around. There's, hundreds of thousands, millions of injuries each year all over the country. Here in Philadelphia, there's 1 million people. There's stuff going on right now. So that's what I like about the younger generation. It's no slight to the older generation who put in the work and built some of those legacy firms that maybe me and you were a part of before. But those guys did good work. But I think we've seen the way of working, getting to know people, being friends, sharing information. That makes it better for the clients, which we're trying to serve, and better for everybody at the end of the day.
No doubt. For sure. I love this stuff. You talked about Roundup, and you talked about, which is the weed killer, Depo-Provera. Are there any other newer kind of mass tort cases on the horizon that you got your hands in, or you're looking at, or?
Yeah, so my firm, we're a mass tort firm. So anytime anything comes up, we're in on it. So we had about 20 different mass torts we looked at last year.
Wow.
So usually we're really involved in about 8 of them. So my top mass torts right now are Roundup. I think that's a great one to get involved with. You talked about hair relaxer. That's another one where women used it for decades. It causes really rare ovarian cancer. And then also this one that I'm really big on are these PFAS or these water contamination. So I think that's going to be probably the next asbestos and be with us for the next 10 to 20 years. We're only beginning to discover what they've been doing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear the term PFAS. We're talking the forever chemicals.
Yep.
And it's like basically it's
everywhere.
Total. It's everywhere.
Yep.
It's in the water. It's
in us.
It's in us. I think they did a study with babies, finding it in babies' blood, like infants. I mean, this is the stuff that, I have 2 little kids, but even if I didn't, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night, where I'm like, we got to do something about this. Like, you can't necessarily undo the past, but you see this kind of exploding. And
I think this is going to be an ongoing litigation for the next 20, 30 years, similar to how our parents' generation thought asbestos was safe. Right, they would put it in our houses where their young children were.
Right.
We were told all of these, products that contain these forever chemicals are safe, and now it's not, and it causes all of this rare type of cancer. So we just started with the water drinking facilities. There was about a $15 billion settlement to help clean up those water systems, but that's the biggest ones. The people out in the rural settings, they're not getting the attention they need, and it's everywhere. So products are going to need to be changed, and that's only done like we know, through lawsuits, through litigating them and holding these companies accountable.
Well, that just brings me back to my hometown. Sorry to keep it, but it's like I represent people in my hometown now against two of the biggest corporations in the world who's essentially poisoned the whole community. And it has been something that's bothered me my whole life, which you just touched on, which is, I just feel like these companies, whether they say it or not, they're very conscious of the people in the communities that they're harming. And they're usually not wealthy, to-do folks. They're usually hardworking people, middle class, lower middle class, that end up taking it on the chin. And in my case, for example, in the town I grew up in, GE had the largest manufacturing plant in North America there for a while. So there's that
they all work there.
They all work there. You can't go there and talk to somebody whose grandfather or great-grand didn't work there. So there's that thread that goes through the whole community. There's still that goodwill and that financial, people quite literally depended on them to live, but there's such a betrayal on the other side of that. There's such a betrayal because meanwhile, the whole company knew what they were doing the whole time, and you have whole families wiped out from cancer, and it just bugs me. I think that there's this socioeconomic component to it.
Certainly there is, and that's what we see. Wherever these big plants are, these big factories are, the people working there, they're the ones that are getting hurt the worst. And it wipes out, like you said, whole generations, whole families, and somebody has to do something about it. So it's not easy, to fight GE. Like, I'm sure they're not rolling over to admit that they were wrong, and they're going to make it all right. It's going to be a long, drag-out fight. Yep. And that's what happens in these mass tort cases. That's what we know. Johnson & Johnson, right? They're on their third bankruptcy right now. These talcum powder cases are coming up on 15 years. How could Johnson & Johnson, that has a market value of hundreds of billions of dollars, be claiming bankruptcy? I'm not a bankruptcy attorney, but that doesn't seem right after they already lost twice.
Right.
So that's what these companies will do. They look at it as a spreadsheet. It's a business for them. Their loyalties to their shareholders, and that's how they're going to act.
With the PFAS cases and the contamination, one of the things I've wondered, and I've wanted to ask someone who knows more, like you, is like, how do you, with something so widespread, how do you trace that all back? To I don't want to say the real offenders, but the origin of it, because it's so ongoing and widespread. I can imagine everyone blaming each other. So and
they do, and they all blame. And when you have multiple defendants there, they all just point the finger at each other. But where we're at now is kind of each material, each piece of PFAS has its own little chemicals and buildup. So we're able to do blood tests on humans, get the blood, see what chemicals are in there, and identify who manufactured that product. That's where the science is now. That's
crazy. So that's actually something you can do in a lab?
Yeah. So we, get people who were exposed, right? They could tell us they live in a certain area where we know it was contaminated, and we think, oh, maybe it's 3M or maybe it's DuPont because they had a factory there. But then you can go further, get a blood test, go in there, identify the chemicals, and then the chemists are able to say they had this chemical in there that was manufactured by this company.
Dude, that just has to be terrifying, being the person who's getting those results, to be like getting that phone call and learning something like that, both terrifying and probably infuriating.
Yeah. No, and again, they've worked at those plants. Their family lived there. It's their whole livelihood. They never thought that this company could do any wrong.
Right.
And here they are going to die on their deathbed because they have it in them.
Yeah. So where do you turn if you're a lawyer, you don't handle mass torts, but you get a call from somebody? What would be your piece, 2 cents on how to handle that? Say you're a divorce lawyer or whatever, what would you do?
Yeah, no, I'm happy.
Obviously, call you.
But, call me first. But no, I'm happy to speak with somebody. And, generally we have similar criteria to other firms that are involved. I'll know the science. I usually have my own expert on every case just because I have so much invested in so many cases. But I'll be able to share the criteria and generally what you're looking for. But in each case, you need to get that medical records and confirm and verify that signature injury, whether it's non-Hodgkin lymphoma, ovarian cancer, this rare brain tumor for the Depo-Provera. Each case is different and has its own science, but everybody has clients out there. If you're divorce, immigration, regular PI attorney, you have clients that are exposed. So, sending out a news blast or an information or doing a TikTok video about, hey, we learned about this study with Depo-Provera. If you have this really rare type of brain tumor that nobody gets and you use Depo-Provera, call us. Right. It could be you, and we could help you.
One of the things that blew my mind when I first started doing some of these cases was the fact that some of these companies can actually, I don't know what term you want to use, pay off or influence the scientific literature. To me, that was a totally insane concept that, I just thought about, okay, this article was published.
Right.
It's a scientist or a doctor. It's neutral. It's true. Not the case in a lot of these situations where you have quite literally industry influence over the science. Could you talk to us about that?
So in the expert depositions, almost always the first question we go to is, who's the author? What's their association? Does this doctor, does he work for Pfizer? He's the lead scientist at Pfizer for 20 years. Okay. Do you know who sponsored this study? Do you know who paid for this? Do you know whose data this is from? And it's, astounding. Like you're saying, almost every study, it's really hard to get that independent study out there because, these big companies, they're not only lobbying, right, at the FDA or the EPA, they're there donating money, but then they also have all the information and the data, and maybe they can manipulate it or present it in the way most beneficial to them. And it happens. I'm like you. I grew up just a regular person, didn't know about any of this, trusted the scientists, trusted the, manufacturers. Now I'm a little skeptical.
Just a bit.
Right.
What's the infrastructure like at your law firm to handle this volume of cases? I think even lawyers don't know what goes into that.
Yeah, so, we have thousands of cases, but it's very departmentalized. So we have it broken down into different departments. So each person in each department has a manager, and then the people that work within that department are experts in it. So we have intake agents, who are very good at gathering that initial information, making the client feel comfortable, asking the questions we need. And then we have medical record coordinators that go and get the specific type of records and know how to request what's needed. And then we have nurse paralegals that would be dedicated to specific litigation. So they could work on hernia mesh for 5 years straight. Or maybe an oncologist nurse comes in and helps us on some of these other cases. And then the paralegals would be very specialized on the type of cases they handle. So it's about giving the clients a whole team, right? It could be 10 people work on one single case, but they all have the expertise in the different part to move the case forward.
That's nice. So you have different kind of groupings of teams.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
In what we do, sometimes it can be a lot of the same over and over again. Is there anything, I'm just curious, that's happened to you lately that was out of the ordinary or piqued your interest or raised your eyebrows? I mean, you're dealing with some of the craziest stuff to begin with, but is there anything lately that you were like, oh wow, this is kind of crazy?
No, unfortunately, I'm not surprised when I see these studies. Right. A couple years ago when I learned about those blood tests we were talking about, my mind was blown. I couldn't believe we were able to nail it down like that, but now that's common. But I think the thing that opened my eyes the most is this Johnson & Johnson third bankruptcy. For whatever reason, that really is rubbing me wrong in what they're trying to do. I don't agree
remind
with
me that, because I hear it as the Texas two-step, which is this, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but basically Johnson & Johnson, who I think last I checked their net worth was something like $70 billion or something insane, where they tried to transfer all the assets of this one product line to another subsidiary and then claim that they're bankrupt, and it got shut down. Basically, the court said, we're not buying that.
Right.
Is that,
Yeah, so what they do is they create, almost a shell company, and then they don't give the assets, they give the liabilities. So the shell company gets formed, and then what does the shell company own? They own the 60,000 talc lawsuits.
Right, so they're like in the red $1 gazillion.
Right.
But that's obviously done with the intention of creating this fake company.
And so there were 2 attempts so far where the judges said exactly like you said, the bankruptcy program is for financially distressed companies. You can't kind of skirt them around and do this. But there's favorable law in Texas. And so last year in 2024, I believe the company's called Red River. Johnson & Johnson opened a new company in Texas, and then they gave them all of the liabilities, and then that's the company that filed for bankruptcy is Red River.
Do they have a different blueprint now because they've been shot down, or is it's kind of like trying it again?
It's trying it again, and certain laws are different in some states, so they're hoping this is their third bite at the apple that this judge will allow them to do it. So it's been done before by some asbestos companies down in Texas. This is their maneuver, and that's kind of where it's born out of. So some manufacturer of asbestos products have done it successfully, Georgia Pacific. So it's kind of their playbook. Right. So we're hoping there was a good ruling in the Purdue opioid litigation from the Supreme Court where it said you couldn't kind of really do this when they're not bankrupt. So there's good case law there that came out recently, and then we beat them 2 times previously in other courts. So that's ongoing now. Probably sometime in March we'll have a decision.
I assume you're involved in that, or you have clients who would be affected by that.
Yeah, we represent clients that cases now are part of this bankruptcy.
That's one of the things that's scary too, is the amount of power the judiciary has, which is justified, by the way. I'm not anti-judge, but it's so freaky when you do our type of work. Judges have such power to influence things like this, and you just hope that, and they have so far, but you hope they see through tactics like this. I tend to think it's getting better as we get older and as time goes on. There's more awareness of corporate misconduct and things like that.
I agree with that, and I think that is happening. So we feel good about the judge, but obviously they picked this venue and this judge for a reason. So we'll see how that turns out, but we're optimistic, and if they beat us on this one, we'll be back fighting for the people that need help.
Amen. So, Joe, thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully nobody needs you, but you never know. So can you just remind us where you're at and how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you guys ever have any questions about anything mass tort, reach out to me, Joe Fantini. I'm over at Rosen Injury Lawyers. Happy to speak with you about any case. It was a pleasure coming here, Tom, and speaking with you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Joe.
And that's a wrap for this episode of City of Brotherly Law. I'm Tom Bosworth, reminding you that in Philly, we don't just practice law, we live it, we breathe it, we fight for it every day. This city was built on grit and determination. That's exactly how we approach justice. That's how we approach cases. Join us next time for more straight talk and legal insights from the heart of Philadelphia. Until then, stay tough and keep it real, Philly.